Hello everyone, and welcome to The Legend Makers. I'm your host Phil, and with me today is special guest, my brother/roommate. Over the course of these episodes, we're going to explore some popular stories we love and dive a little bit more deeply into the way that those stories can act as guides or tools for understanding the world around us. We're going to be drawing on a combo of philosophy, science, and religious thought to better explore those ideas. But at the end of the day, we don't really mean this to be an educational podcast. It's just for asking questions, starting interesting convos, and having fun. So it's been a while. It's been a couple weeks. It's been a busy couple weeks. But we are back, and today we are talking about Spider-Man.
Who is Spider-Man? He's a criminal, that's who he is.
God, every time I hear J.K. Simmons' voice, just not even talking about Spider-Man, just every time I hear J.K. Simmons' voice, I start laughing. Today's episode will be pretty chill. It's going to run the same format as the Star Wars episode, where it's more thematically low-key and specific. Everyone knows who Spider-Man is. I mean, even if they don't know who Spider-Man is, they know who Spider-Man is. And there have been so many different iterations of the character over the last couple decades that to go through any single one of them in any sort of detail would just take 500 years. And so the idea is that we're going to talk more about why the character of Spider-Man is so great and so important to us, and kind of bring up examples from different versions of him that highlight the best things we can learn.
When I was a kid, I think it was grade 1 or 2. It doesn't matter. You know when you're a kid and you have to present like this big board of the class so that all the parents come in and can look at what the kids have done? We had to do this thing with like our personal profiles, and we had to list our heroes.
Oh, yeah.
And at the time, the only superhero movie I'd seen was Spider-Man.
Yeah.
And I thought hero meant superhero. So I just listed Spider-Man.
But were you wrong, though?
But no, everyone else had like Mother Teresa or like their parents or whatever. And I was like, Spider-Man.
But were you wrong, though?
See, it's all come full circle today. Today is my redemption.
In that vein, Spider-Man.
You and I could rule this thing, Spider-Man.
There are so many good Spider-Man memes. I think for all that our Star Wars episode lacked, or our Jedi episode lacked prequel memes, this episode might just be mired in stupid impressions.
Do you have anything in particular that you want to start with? Because this isn't particularly organized, but there is a general
organization. Pattern. I think the first thing to talk about when talking about Spider-Man is, for me, Spider-Man has always had a particular kind of magic to him as a hero character.
Yeah.
Spider-Man is fundamentally a very universally relevant character, regardless of the version of him that shows up in whichever adaptation that we're looking at. And I think some have stronger meta-narrative themes and motifs than others, and we're going to focus on those more today. Like, we will be mentioning moments in the Raimi adaptations because they're classic and formative. And we'll also probably mention a couple times the Amazing Spider-Man adaptations. But in terms of focused character work and the reasons why Spider-Man, whether it be the concept of Spider-Man or Peter Parker or Miles Morales or what have you, is such an important character, we're going to talk more about the MCU version, like the Tom Holland one, the Spiderverse movie, and the PS4 game.
Nice.
Which you have played and I have not.
Well, I've
basically watched it like a film from beginning to end.
Yeah, the main reason is the Raimi movies kind of paint a nice picture of the world, but they're not really meant to be super serious in its thematics. Like, the themes are very basic.
And probably the number one takeaway from those is the with great power comes great responsibility motif. Yeah, exactly. And then the rest of it, honestly, Peter's kind of a jerk.
Well, I don't think he's... I just don't think I particularly like... And we'll talk more about this, I guess, but I don't particularly like the representation of Peter Parker as a person. As far as what the potential the character has as shown in other versions. Similarly, I don't particularly love the representation of him in the Amazing Spider-Man movies.
Yeah, even though Andrew Garfield does a great job.
Yeah.
And I feel really bad for how he kind of got screwed over through that role. Yes. But the interpretation of the character is not my favorite.
Both movie series have great like Spider-Man moments, and they have a pretty good like fun visual version of the character, but I don't think that personally, I think that Peter Parker is the core of the character. It isn't Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Spider-Man is fun, but you can create any kind of, as evidenced by the multiverse of different versions of him, which are all cool. You know, no. Like, I think you can create, I don't know, you have like Spider-Man, but he has like mechanical arms this time. Or Spider-Man, but I don't know, he's from the future, like Spider-Man 2099.
Yeah.
And all of them are cool because like visually, the costume is cool and the powers are cool. But what makes the character good is the person behind it.
Yes, not necessarily Peter Parker, but the person behind Spider-Man.
Exactly.
I say that because Miles, obviously, or Gwen, or you know, who have you. Yeah,
I just mean in terms of although those movies get a lot right about like the villains in the universe, I think that the core person
of Spider-Man is kind
slightly,
of weak.
Yeah, he isn't as relatable as he should be in a lot of different ways. And he's also a little confused.
Yeah.
Like, on the one hand, he'll be kind of a pushover in the Raimi movies, and he's kind of pathetic and a loser. Yeah. But then on the other hand, he's also kind of a jerk. Like, he's too much of
one thing or another.
Yeah, I don't think there's a good balance in how his character is presented. And don't get me started, MJ in those movies is just like a tragedy.
A hard L all around.
Yeah. Alfred Molina is great as Doc Ock.
Yes.
Willem Dafoe is transcendent as the Green Goblin.
Spider-Man.
So is Jacob
I'm something of a scientist myself.
At the end of the day, there are a lot of great things in those movies, and I don't think that necessarily the new Tom Holland version is like objectively better.
No.
But it just focuses a lot more on Peter as a character, as opposed to the other movies are kind of more just fun versions of Spider-Man, Peter Parker doing things, you know?
Yeah, no, 100% the MCU movies aren't perfect Spider-Man adaptations, but I respect them a lot for being very character-focused and having strong emotional cores tied to a character.
Yeah. Which,
as many times as I watched and rewatched the Raimi movies, or even the Amazing Spider-Man movies, I never got that with them. I didn't have a particular emotional attachment to the character of Peter Parker. It was more to the concept of the movie that I was watching.
And I think this will become more clear when we talk about what exactly we like about Peter Parker's character. And I think this is why Raimi's movies don't work for me, is if you look at what Raimi patterned the films after, which is the original old Spider-Man comics, like the 60s comics.
Yeah.
And that's what the whole visual design and everything is supposed to look like. The premise of the character is essentially not too different from someone like Clark Kent.
Yeah.
Who Peter Parker is supposed to be his alter ego who's like mild-mannered.
Yeah.
Right? And he's supposed to be a nerd who has superpowers, and that's kind of it. You know, you don't really get to see him as a person in his daily life as much as the character is now portrayed. Like, you see him struggle with a lot more on a personal level. He has more of a personality. And I think the big thing that we're going to talk about more is just the relationships that Peter has with everyone in his life and with strangers, right? Especially. And Raimi, in the Raimi movies, kind of just everyone either hates him or he like is useless to them. Like, you don't really see him as a character in his personal life.
Having strong relationships with other characters.
Exactly. You know, it's just missing for me.
I think in that vein, well, first, having said all of that, Spider-Man Into the Spiderverse is the flawless movie. It lacks nothing. It has everything. It is perfect in every way. Yes, that is an objective statement, and you can quote me on that.
I fully agree. Peter Parker's always an incomplete person before he becomes Spider-Man. Not necessarily because he's a loser or whatever, or because he's a nerd, but because he doesn't have the self-confidence and the ability to express himself and to know who he is, right? And his identity. So the way I interpret it, I think the reason the concept of Spider-Man is so effective is I think it's basically just the purest form of the superhero archetype, where it's a person who could be like anyone who is in a normal life position, and they're given some sort of, by random fluke chance, they're given the opportunity to choose to be something more. And them making that choice is always what's inspirational. But there is a kind of necessary condition that they be given something unique. And in a lot of cases, before they make that choice, they have that thing given to them, and they also have other things taken away. So they're in a position like anyone else where you have certain things that are given to you by life, and you have other things that are also by chance taken away from you by life. And that's also the unique condition in which everyone has to make that choice.
Yeah.
And I think particularly if you interpret him getting his powers as not necessarily being the trigger point, but rather in the case of the original Raimi movies, it's Uncle Ben, with great power comes great responsibility. It's him understanding who he is. I think a great example of it is in Spiderverse.
Yeah.
Miles gets his powers, and in a metaphor, he doesn't know how to use them yet until he realizes what his identity is towards the end of the movie.
Yeah.
And there's that concept of the leap of faith that's talked about. Yeah. Where it isn't necessarily just being able to harness some sort of physical skill of like manipulating webs or whatever to jump around. It's rather various degrees of self-belief, like self-actualization, understanding. Yes. And that's what I think Spider-Man and Peter Parker really represent in the choice that they make as a superhero, right?
We brought up the fact that it's not the hero that Spider-Man is, but rather the person behind that hero. And that person does not necessarily have to be Peter Parker. Yeah. It could be Miles, it could be Gwen, it could be, whoever. But
Nick Cage.
Each version of the character has potential individual strengths, unique attributes with strong elements within them that they are able to channel into doing good for others. And those attributes are both like physical powers, so whatever variation of powers they get from the radioactive spider, and also personality traits, and also like their particular personal flair. They're the thing inside them. There's the scene in Spiderverse where Miles's dad comes to talk to him through the door, and he goes, "There's the spark in you, and I know that whatever you do with it, you're going to do great things." That idea of a spark in every individual person is kind of a universal thing.
Yeah.
We often talk about how, every individual is unique and da-da-da-da-da, but very genuinely, everyone does have a combination of elements that make them who they are, and that can be harnessed to do good. And it's the harnessing to do good thing that is the key of Spider-Man, that he is in a position that anyone else could be in. And he has a unique intersection of characteristics, and he makes the choice. There's that whole sequence in Spider-Verse after Chris Pine, Peter Parker dies, which, sidebar, I cannot believe that movie gave me 5 minutes of Chris Pine, Peter Parker, and then immediately killed him. But anyway, there's that whole sequence where MJ gives her eulogy after he's killed, and she talks about how anyone can choose to be Spider-Man. And I think that's a really key point, because Peter didn't have to be Spider-Man after he got bit, but he made the choice to channel his kind of unique capabilities that only he had into something good. Everyone has unique capabilities that only they have.
And I think the key element to it is the fact that he needed to be empowered in a degree mentally, not necessarily physically.
It's important to talk a little bit about the motif of with great power comes great responsibility.
That's true.
I always remember when the very first time that I saw the very first Spider-Man, the Raimi ones, right? Yeah. Spider-Man 1 is seared into my memory forever, alongside the with great power comes great responsibility quote, because I was like, 7, I think. And a couple weeks before that movie came on TV, I had lied to our dad for the very first time. Do you remember this?
I don't remember.
It was the stupidest 7-year-old lie. I had told him that I did my homework and I hadn't done my homework. Something hilariously dumb like that. And he'd gotten really upset with me, and I couldn't understand why. He was upset with me for the whole 2 weeks, and I was so distraught about it. And at the end of those 2 weeks, he and you were watching the first Spider-Man downstairs, and I was really distraught because you were doing it without me. And so finally he brought me downstairs and he sat me down as that scene was playing, and he explained to me that he was so upset with me because I had been put in this position where I had no reason to lie to my parents, and I had, all these strengths and, all these good things that I could be doing, and I made the choice to tell the stupid lie when I had the responsibility to make the choice not to lie. Dude, that is seared in my brain. Every time I have the impulse to like tell a white lie, I think of Uncle Ben. And I'm like, oh God, I can't do it. It's like, I am a terrible liar because of these movies, okay?
That's hilarious. I didn't remember that story.
I really like what you said, where you said that Spider-Man is always in this position where he is given things by life and simultaneously things are taken away from him by life, and he is left in that juncture where he now has to make a choice, which that's constantly happening to everyone in their lives, regardless of where you are, who you are. So that motif of with great power comes great responsibility is something that can be interpreted as, well, Peter is given physical superpowers, and so now he's responsible for using them. But I think that it's an idea that's been around for a very long time. According to a brief Google search, it's one of the decrees that was made by the French National Convention in 1793, where they said that the people's representatives will reach their destination invested with the highest confidence and unlimited power. They will show great character. They must consider that great responsibility follows inseparably from great power. To their energy, to their courage, and above all, to their prudence, they shall owe their success and their glory. Now, that was specifically in the context of people who are voted into some position of literal power. Yeah. But before that, years before that, originally...
This is something our dad told us, basically, when we first saw the movie as kids. He was like, this is actually from the Bible.
Yeah, so the original form of this quote, I'm assuming that...
I'm sure it existed in some capacity before.
Yeah, the motif existed in some capacity. But as articulated, it's from Luke 12:48, where it says, quote, "From everyone who has been given much, much will be demanded. And from the one who has been entrusted with much, much more will be asked. For unto whomsoever much is given, of him shall be much required. And to whom men have committed much, of him they will ask the more." Also, like half the famous presidents in U.S. history have quoted something along those lines. Yeah. But the point being, I would argue that this idea of great power comes great responsibility, with great power comes great responsibility, is kind of universally applicable in its non-physical sense. Because every human being has potential for greatness. And not greatness in a literal sense, but potential for being something entirely unique because they are in a position where many variables have intersected in a way that they literally have not for anyone else. That has power, I would argue. That has a particular kind of clout in the world that no one else can harness.
Yeah. And I think, like we said, it isn't without restrictions to what that means, because it's not just you, achieving your dreams of, becoming a billionaire and owning a nice car.
Yes.
Right? It has to do with a particular implementation of what makes you unique and special. And I think
that's the great responsibility thing. So you have that uniqueness, that spark that Miles' dad talks about in Spiderverse. What do you do with it? Where is it directed and how? And I think that the character of Spider-Man has always been a really great lighthouse for that how. His qualities, his compassion, his kindness, his genuine friendliness, those things that we'll talk about in a bit, for others, for helping others. Very briefly, I wanted to say that...
once again, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but once again, we talked about in the Jedi episode, it's the outward-looking element, right?
Quintessential.
It's the same thing of in various versions of Peter's character, he's almost outward-looking to a fault.
Yeah, it's like a flaw of his that he forgets to look out for his own life.
That's where a lot of the tension often comes from. Like you mentioned the day-by-day issue, where with a lot of superheroes, there's a choice to be made at one point, And I'm saying this in terms of the way the story is
yes,
told, not necessarily
the narrative
intrinsically,
infrastructure.
Right? But with Spider-Man, in the way it's written, because he still lives as an ordinary person most of his time, he has this kind of constant choice that has to be made between being late to a doctor's appointment or whatever, or missing payment on his rent. Give me rent.
Give me rent. You'll get your rent when you fix this damn door.
I don't know what that voice was, but
that's how I hear it in my head every time I think about it.
Yeah, the point is there are all these choices that he's constantly making between, I don't know, stopping the robbery versus missing his date and getting dumped, right?
Yeah, or like
in all variations you always see that. And I think that has to do with the fact that he often makes the choice that he believes is necessary to help the person, right? As opposed to helping himself.
Yeah.
Which is a flaw of his to a certain capacity, because a lot of times the main conflicts with, I don't know, his MJ, or a lot of times even the villains of the stories can come back to bite him in terms of his own family or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's that inherent kind of outward-looking nature of Peter Parker as a person, which is, I think, really has to be thought about for yourself, because you really like it when you see it, but I don't think it always registers, at least for me, of like, what does it mean to actually be like that? Like, what is the kind of personal cost that you incur by being outward looking like that? It isn't easy, right? It sounds really nice, but there's a lot of personal suffering that comes your way.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to bring up, I've been thinking about this for a while. This is one of my favorite quotes in anything ever. It always makes me emotional.
Another one of her favorite things ever.
Yeah. I'm so consistent, you guys. But everyone has power or capability within them that then they can choose to direct towards something. And the question of what that something is always a little bit difficult. I was thinking about James Baldwin's If Beale Street Could Talk. Now, I haven't read the whole book, but I have watched the movie and I have read excerpts from the book. It's a beautiful story and I would recommend it to anyone listening.
Do they live in New York?
Yes, they do live in New York. But okay, so in James Baldwin's If Beale Street Could Talk, I guess the narrator's boyfriend, Fonny, has this arc where, and I'm saying this based on the movie, so if anybody is a diehard book fan, I apologize if I've misunderstood the point of this. But Fonny has this arc where Tish always talks about how he's always been very good at woodworking and has this artistic flair, and really enjoys spending time in his little workshop in his studio apartment working on creating things. He spends most of the movie, there's this idea through most of the movie where he doesn't really know where he's going with it, and what he can do with it. And like the plot of the movie is very sad, and so I'm not going to get into that. But at the end of the film, he and Tish have this exchange where he tells her, I love you, and I'm going to build us a table, and a whole lot of folks are going to be eating off of it for a long, long time to come. And I love that line so much, and I think about it too often. But because he's been struggling, as so many young people do throughout the course of the story, with this skill that he has, this talent that he has, this thing that brings him joy. And he's struggling with many, many other things as well, a lot of which are not in his control, and a lot of which are things that make him suffer and make his family suffer. But ultimately, he has this realization at the end of the movie, and he has this line where he's going to use this talent that he has to bring other people together. This is poignant to me because I think a lot of young people have talents or things that they're passionate about or things that they're really good at that they don't know where and how they're going to use those. And especially because throughout the course of your education, there are kind of channeled or streamed directions that people are put in. And then, adults tell you, follow your dreams, do what you love. But then also that's kind of not practical at all. And then also, you may even be doing what you love, but you don't know why you're doing it. You don't know in what direction you're putting those efforts. Even if you have the ability to go into something that you care about. This is an element that Peter and Spider-Man as a concept really highlights, where you do things, the direction of your efforts is always to help others, to bring people together. That's part of the responsibility. And I think that it's helped me personally hone my own spark.
It has a lot to do with how you orient yourself, right?
You orient yourself, and in orienting yourself, that self-knowledge kind of gets refined and solidified, and it reinforces itself. It helps you better understand who you are as a person in your effort to channel your passions, your strengths in the direction of helping other people and bringing other people together. See, I eventually got it. Great conclusion. There we go.
I think on that point, something that we should maybe bring up to maybe clarify a little bit, and I know we always say this, but our next episode
is
going to be more about how we take personal action and what it means in a social sense.
Yeah.
But I think something that we should mention here with respect to that outward-looking nature of Peter is bringing people together. You mentioned that right now. Or helping others. It doesn't necessarily have to be this, like, major...
systemic shift.
Yeah, that's
you don't have to overthrow the government. Or like...
You don't even need to...
start a homeless shelter or, donate to...
Well, it could be all of those things and none of those things.
Yes.
Right? And I don't know if you wanted to... I know you wanted to bring up a Dostoevsky quote, I think.
Yes, my boy Fyodor. There's this great Dostoevsky quote from Crime and Punishment that I think about in this vein, where he says, quote, "Certain good, big-hearted, and truly intelligent people will tell you that it is sad and difficult to help in an isolated fashion, and that one must tear out the root of the evil and implant good. Others, also fine and good people, but already too steeped in theory, will bring you entire volumes of proof, truly accurate from one point of view, that isolated instances of good do not help society. They forget that among other things, they do help that particular individual, and they make you yourself better and uphold love in society. And so fools and rogues will immediately conclude that it is not necessary to help at all, and that this is progress."
With the same kind of idea. There's
motif.
Yeah, there's like, just sort of like how in Spiderverse they have the motif of the spark. In the Spider-Man PS4 game, Aunt May, this is like later in Peter's life, he's like 21, I think. She always tells him that when you help someone, you help everyone. And that's something that's repeated a lot for Peter himself and by Aunt May in the whole thematic of the story. And it's really embodied, I think, by everything that happens in the game. I think that it's really a different way of expressing Spider-Man's philosophy, but just as accurate. And that has to do with no problem is really too small for him. Mm-hmm. Anytime he meets anyone, whatever the problem is, whatever the deal is, he's always there to be of service. He sees someone, he wants to make friends with them, he wants to understand what they need, what they're struggling with. And that, at the end of the day, always comes back at his own personal cost because, he's spending his time selflessly. Yeah. But he always kind of emphasizes, and through what May says, that he isn't just helping that person. He's helping build that person's life to the point where they can then
help
others, right?
Yeah.
There's a chain of community, and I think particularly what Dostoevsky said right there, you really hit the nail on the head with that, of not only are you helping one person, you're also upholding love in society.
Yes.
And I think that's an interesting, not necessarily love, but you're upholding goodness, you're upholding selflessness, you're representing something more than yourself.
Yeah,
right?
that others can also work towards.
And you consistently see that, I think, in the best Spider-Man stories, particularly, I guess, for me, in the PS4, because that's the most fresh in my mind. There are so many different characters that Peter helps and inspires, from like the homeless people at the homeless shelter that he's friends with, to, I don't know, Miles Morales as a person who's struggling, all kinds of people. And it's always with such genuineness and kindness, where he really wants to understand the person and help them, right? Because he just sees value in them. He wants to bring out the best in them. And I think that is something that is almost a skill.
Yeah.
It isn't something you just wake up with.
No, it's
takes,
very much a skill.
And I think that's what I appreciate about the Tom Holland movies, where it really kind of helps show an incomplete version of Peter, where he still struggles with his own personal identity.
Well,
but
he has the blueprint there. I think there are...
The more you see that, the more he reinforces his own outward lookingness, the more he's able to help other people.
Yes.
The more he kind of builds it back and forth in a dialectic.
Movie to movie,
right?
yeah.
And that I think that's an important thing to show, that a person like the version of Peter in Spider-Man PS4, who is kind of fully formed in his...
older...
in his attitude towards the world, in his function as a hero, he knows who he is.
Yes.
He's confident. Obviously, he's still a goofball and a loser in his own personal time,
Yeah.
right? But he's at the peak of his powers in his ability to help others, to be inspirational, and all of that. And it's nice to be able to see a younger version of him who's still a kid and is kind of still lost.
Yeah.
Right? But on the right track.
The thing that stands out to me, Peter always approaches everyone as human beings first, and human beings who inherently have value first, and everything else later. And as such, he treats everyone with respect. He treats everyone with compassion. He deals with people from all different walks of life with kind of a similar level of friendliness and warmth and genuineness, and he trusts them, even if sometimes it comes back and bites him in the behind. Like, he'll be friends with someone like Harry Osborn, and then he'll also be buddies with the guy at the bodega corner to the same degree of closeness and genuineness. And
that's something that I always really love. Even with, like, for example, you mentioned his friendship with Harry, right?
Yeah.
Harry is son of, like, the biggest asshole in the city, right?
Yeah.
And essentially, it's so easy for a kid like Peter, who grew up the way he did.
Yeah.
Obviously, he grew up friends with Harry, but...
Yeah.
From just a basic point of view, it's really nice to have that contrast where a lot of people would be judgmental and would see Harry as kind of like an elitist weirdo, or not necessarily to shun him, but
to have bitterness or reservations as him representing something that is bad.
Evil, right?
Yeah.
To just kind of lump him in as the product of a terrible system,
yeah.
right? Especially in the PS4 game. Obviously, Harry in the original Raimi movies is a bit iffy also in The Amazing Spider-Man, but as a premise, I think that Harry also, in many of the versions that I've seen, wants to do good. He wants to be a good person, and a lot of that is through the inspiration he gets from his friends.
Yeah.
The ability that Peter has to relate to someone like that and be there for him, while simultaneously being able to do that for Miles, or for, the homeless person, or for the criminal that he runs into. Like, I think that's something that I love about Peter as a character, is a lot of the villains that he fights, especially in the game where he's been around and fought them a number of times, he's more like old buddies with them, where he's like, hey, remember last time I put you in jail? It's a classic, right?
It's very classic Spider-Man.
But he isn't like that with new villains, right? Oftentimes he's trying to figure out what their deal is, and he almost always gives people the benefit of the doubt, like until he sees someone really hurting people in a malicious way, he is pretty gentle and nice with them, relatively speaking. Yeah. When he does give someone the benefit of the doubt and they betray him, those are only the really times where you see him get really upset, because he feels like that person has betrayed his trust.
Personally betrayed his
exactly.
trust. Yeah.
He's someone that who gives himself to everyone else.
Yes.
Right. And when those people refuse to take it and even know who he is personally, and still turn their back on him, he feels even worse, because he feels personally responsible. He feels like maybe I could have given more to that person. Yeah. And I think that it obviously isn't always really healthy.
No, I think that's a character flaw in Peter that I appreciate, actually, because I think that it's something that I personally struggle with. It is a very real struggle that comes with the territory of being a selfless person, of being a baseline compassionate person, and it's something that's very important. Just as the skill of being able to be friendly and outward looking and being able to help different kinds of people with different problems is a skill, so is being able to have your own emotional boundaries and be able to detach your efforts from how someone receives those efforts and reacts to them, because people's
Exactly.
like people's decision making is their own. Fundamentally, you don't have control over that. And I think Peter is a great character because he very realistically struggles with that a lot.
On a fundamental level, it never deters him from doing what he does.
I love that scene at the end of Far From Home where... Not Far From Home. Homecoming. I mean, Far From Home is also great. But I love the scene at the end of Homecoming where the Vulture literally just tried to kill him. And Peter's first instinct when he gets up and his wings are sparking is to be like, no, oh my God, you're going to get hurt. You're going to die. Yeah. And the dude literally just tried to murder him. Yeah. And obviously,
and then he blows up, and 2 seconds later, he just instantly rushes in to help him.
Yeah, right? And Peter instantly rushes in to help. And I think that what I love about that interaction or that scene is that Peter has spent the entire movie trying to stop this guy from hurting others. Mm-hmm. And he has... At the end of the movie, he fights him and he makes sure to tie him up and put him there to account for his criminal act, like for the people that he's hurt. But at the same time,
he doesn't go easy on people.
He doesn't go easy on people. He doesn't let them off the hook. He doesn't fail to hold them accountable for their wrongdoings. But he still treats everyone like a human being, and that inherently demands care and compassion for their life and their livelihood. I love that moment at the end, and Holland plays it so well. Like I love that kid.
I mean, going along with that, there are so many moments in the game that I think just perfectly capture Peter's character. Particularly, I love how on the opposite direction, with people he has no personal connection to, complete strangers, even like, I guess if you consider a villain, he has a personal connection to them because he's fighting them, right? But he'll just kind of see a rando, and he'll always give someone the time of day. He'll never... He's the busiest man alive, right? But he's always there to give another piece of himself to someone. And I love... Before he even meets Miles in the storyline, this is towards the beginning, I think there's some bit where...
This is in the PS4 game.
Yeah, where Miles, like, gets in a fist fight or something. Either some people are trying to rob an old lady. I can't remember what's happening. Miles is... I think after Miles' dad gets killed... He's struggling, and I think he's trying to do some good, and he ends up getting beat up or something. And Spider-Man comes in and I think stops the guys and beats them up. But instead of leaving, he like helps Miles up, and he like teaches him how to throw a punch, and he lets him get one on him, right? Yeah. He like genuinely helps. Like Miles hits him and he like gets knocked over, right? Yeah. And the fact that he takes the time for a stranger, and he does that consistently in so many different ways.
I really like that scene in Spiderverse where Miles goes to buy after Peter has been killed. That whole sequence, my goodness. He's talking to the Stan Lee cameo. He's just the guy who sells these Spider-Man costumes, but he goes, "We were friends, And obviously that's a meta meme because it's Stan Lee. Yeah. But also, you have no doubt in your mind that Spider-Man would have been genuinely friends with this random store owner. Yeah. Right? So, like the same as how in Homecoming, Peter's buddies with Delmar.
Well, the concept of like a community superhero.
Yeah. Is friendly neighborhood Spider-Man.
Well, exactly, right? I think that's what works so well. At the end of the day, he's both a hero in his personal life in the community as well as in his professional life, right? I love that. Yeah, I love that in the game, Aunt May runs this homeless shelter and Peter volunteers there, and he goes. It's not just him. He goes there with MJ. He invites Miles to come and help. Yeah, like it's very much has to do with this community, the kind of outward looking structure of living, right? Where all of the characters, I think the reason I like that adaptation is because all of the characters embody it. Like MJ is, instead of just being a fashion model, she's a reporter and she's trying to help people.
She was an actress in the Raimi movies, right?
She was both.
She was aspiring actress and opera singer.
Because that's what she is in the comics. She's a fashion model.
Classic.
Not just that, like the fact that Aunt May is retired, but she spends her time helping the community. Yeah. Before he turns evil, right? Octavius, Doc Ock, is Peter's supervisor in grad school. Their work is dedicated to, they work with veterans who have lost limbs, right? And I think that there are just so many degrees where Peter could have chosen to work at whatever company he wanted and been
probably make a lot more money than he was making.
But he chooses to work with Octavius because he believes in what he's doing and he believes that he's going to help people. It just, that theme is constantly shown, and it's always to his detriment. Like, dude can't pay his rent, gets evicted from his apartment, but in the story, what that ends up leading to is him needing a place to stay and reconnecting with MJ, which leads to them kind of forming a partnership and getting back together. And, you know, there's a whole plot line associated to it. But the point is, he doesn't do it alone.
Yeah.
And he always has the people that he cares for there for him to help.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I think this is something that's also really great about all versions of Spider-Man. He's never doing it alone. He always has these really powerful influences of love and caring that help not just forge who he is as a person, but help reinforce him and keep him steady. You know, similar to how in like the Batman episode we said how much we love Alfred because he's like the emotional core of Batman. In this case, pretty much everyone is always like feeding directly into Peter and helping him remain who he is.
Yeah, I do.
Or equally with Miles, with like his dad and his mom and his friends.
Yeah, I think that that's such an important thing that many Spider-Man stories reflect. No one is made to do it alone. One of the things that I especially really like about the MCU adaptations, and also I think about Spider-Verse, is that there are a lot of people who know Spider-Man is both Spider-Man and his regular person persona, because I think that makes room for a support system that is really vital to everyone's life. Peter is able to be as helpful and as outward looking as he is without like completely folding in on himself like a little stack of cards, because he has this network of people around him.
Gain hope from his friends and family.
And I don't think that it's necessarily even great philosophical inspiration or anything big. It's as basic as, you know, you have someone there to look out for you, to make sure that you've eaten some meals, let you crash on their couch when you've been evicted. I really like Peter's relationship with Aunt May in the MCU adaptations. I know people love to make jokes about how Aunt May keeps getting younger in every adaptation, but I genuinely really love Marissa Tomei's portrayal of Aunt May.
To be fair, Aunt May was way too old in the Raimi movies.
Yeah, Aunt May was insanely too old in the Raimi movies, but I really like Marissa Tomei's portrayal of May.
How old is Marissa Tomei, though?
She's like in her 50s,
yeah, that's fine.
She's not even that young.
Yeah, she's just very beautiful.
She's just a very beautiful woman, which is allowed. Her domestic support of Peter, interpersonal emotional support of Peter in those movies has always been really well done in my mind, because I think that in many ways, especially for that version of the character, that's the kind of support Peter needs. Or his buddies at school, right? Ned and MJ in the second one, right? Even in the first one, a character like Liz, who he kind of stands up constantly and she has no idea what's going on with him, but she makes it clear to say multiple times, like, dude, I'm not even mad at you, like, are you okay?
Yeah,
I think that's a really nice touch, that everyone needs people in their life to be looking out for them, just as every individual needs to be conscious of the fact that other people are going through it and they need someone looking out for them too. And I think that that's something that you see in a lot of Spider-Man stories. The other thing that I really wanted to talk about was, and I think this is highlighted in Spiderverse, probably also in the PS4 game, just because those are the ones with largest variety of characters showing up, there's a special value to an intergenerational support system that Spider-Man has kind of always had, where he has people in his life who are parental figures. He has people in his life who are formal mentors that he can look up to, professional ones. He has personal friends. They're all different kinds of ages, and they serve very different purposes and support him in very different ways. Like in Spider-Verse, you have Miles's parents, you have Gwen, you have Peter B. Parker, you have Peter Parker. They all contribute very different things to Miles's growth as an individual.
For sure.
Same with, like in the MCU, May and Tony and Ned all provide very different kinds of character input into who Peter becomes as a person. I think that that's another really important thing to think about. Of like, who do we have in our lives that we can look towards to help to learn from and to grow with in different ways.
What you mentioned there, it's not as though any one of those characters determines who Peter becomes.
Yes.
it's all of them.
Yeah.
And
then it's also none of them. It's like
he's the one who's making the choice. It might be good to bring up that scene in Homecoming. It's like the big turning point in the movie.
Oh yeah, where he clowns big time.
No. I'm talking about the bit where he lifts the building. Right?
Oh my goodness. I can't believe I forgot about that scene. I think that scene is my favorite Spider-Man scene in any Spider-Man.
And I think that it's a very well adapted scene from the comics. There's an orientation, but at the end of the day, there's a personal will and identity that is formed over time.
Forged almost.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's forged through struggle and mistakes. Okay, she distracted me with a dumb joke. The point is, what the character still needs is you should never take away intense amount of willpower and dedication it takes to be Spider-Man. Yeah. And in that scene, I love that there's this obviously duel where he still feels like he's Peter Parker.
Yeah.
And what Peter Parker represents there isn't himself as a person. It represents him before his transformation.
Yeah.
Right? When he says, "Come on, Spider-Man," and he manages to lift the building. It's supposed to be that leap of faith in Spider-Verse. It's the same deal.
Yeah.
It's that ability to think and truly believe and understand and implement it, that you are more than just the same person you've always been. You can do more. You can be more.
Yeah.
And you just have to decide and commit to it. And in that commitment, in that scene, he isn't just deciding to lift the building. He's deciding that he's not going to let the Vulture win. Yeah. He's deciding that he's going to still go after him. He's deciding that he's going to put himself in harm's way once again. He's not going to give up.
He's going to be Spider-Man.
Exactly.
I love that, and I love that.
And when he's going to be Spider-Man, that entails a lot more than just lifting the building. Right? Yes. And that entails suffering. That entails difficulty. Yeah. But it also entails all of the good that he can do. Yeah. Right.
And I love that there's a step to it. He says, "Come on, Peter." And then he ties that in and he said, "Come on, Spider-Man." Yeah. And there's no difference between Peter and Spider-Man, but there also is a difference between Peter and Spider-Man.
Exactly, yeah.
They're married in this really thematically meaningful way, where one elevates the other, but one also grounds the other. There is no Spider-Man without Peter Parker, but there also isn't Peter Parker without his ability to be Spider-Man.
Yeah. Something I really like about Homecoming, because we were talking about Homecoming, in a similar vein, there's the bit towards the end where he finds out that the Vulture is his dad and all that stuff, and those are all great scenes. I love the scene in the car where the Vulture slowly realizes that Peter is Spider-Man.
Yeah, that's an excellent sequence.
The light goes green when he realizes it. He's like, "Oh." And Michael Keaton is just great in that movie. But I really like how... also, there's so many great moments. Sorry, I'm going way off topic here. There's the bit where Keaton lets his daughter out. Yeah. And he turns around and pulls a gun on Peter. And Peter in his brain is trying to be uber cool. So he
reacts so chilled that it's not the normal reaction someone would have to a man pulling a gun on them.
Yeah, exactly.
He's like, I'm not Spider-Man. What are you talking
about? He's just trying to play it so cool that he just doesn't react to the gun. And he's like, okay, so clearly I'm right. That's great. But in that scene, he threatens to kill him and everyone he loves and all of that. And Peter leaves, and as soon as he leaves the car, you don't realize till a little bit after where Peter has already left his phone in the car to be able to track him.
He made the decision in the car.
Exactly. And I think that's the kind of thing that is a turning point for his character in the story, and is the same kind of turning point in the story with Miles, where in the face of potential failure,
the loss of his uncle and not being able to talk to his dad in that scene, he's going through a lot in that moment.
And also just the fact that he's let his friends down in that scene, in that movie, in Spider-Verse, where he feels like a failure and he feels like they don't believe in him anymore, axed him from the mission. Right. For him to come back from that and to decide that, no, I can choose to be Spider-Man. It isn't just a simple thing of being it or not being it. Yeah. Right? It's in every moment where you're faced with some sort of inevitable danger or inevitable struggle or choice, going into it, there's a sense of stubbornness to it where it's like, I'm still going to choose
Yeah.
to do this, even if you're telling me to my face that you're going to kill my family and everyone I love, right? He's already made the choice. He doesn't care what he says to him.
Yeah.
He's already planning ahead as to how he can beat him, right? And it's the same thing, I think, with all the iterations of the character. It's in every way possible. Spider-Verse is like the perfect movie because it does all of that perfectly and a lot more explicitly than Homecoming does.
Yeah.
Spider-Verse is almost unfair because of how meta it is.
Well, I think Spider-Verse is a love letter to everything that we have talked about here. It captures...
If you haven't seen it, go watch that movie. Don't even listen to this episode.
Yeah. It captures the essence of the point of Spider-Man so quintessentially in every beat of the film, whichever character that it's dealing with. I think Miles is its focal point, and Miles is the main character. And Miles embodies everything that Spider-Man can be. Does such a perfect job at not making "you could be Spider-Man too" sound like a marketing gimmick. Like, it says you could be Spider-Man too, and straight up means it. Like, it's 100% genuine in its message that every individual has the capacity to be a version of Spider-Man in their daily life. And what that means is making the choice, having faith that that choice will pay off, and committing to channeling your capacity towards good. I was going to just say really quickly that...
What does all of this mean for us as people, living our own lives? We all have struggles, we all have difficulties. Everyone has to deal with tough decisions right now in the world. And you struggle with the way things are, the way you wish things could be, your own personal difficulties.
Your own personal failings.
Just like with, I think, the way that Peter has to make these day-to-day decisions. What all this ultimately means for me is I am never going to find my purpose or myself, really, if I focus on what I'm struggling with. Mm-hmm. If I focus on how I can fix what I'm currently in the throes of conflict about, whether it's school or whatever. You have to dedicate time to those things. You have to work hard, but considering and implementing in the small ways that you can love and care for other people. Yeah. And considering how you can be a positive influence on the world in whatever small way it may be. And I think that goes to the minutest detail of like spending time with our bird. Yeah. And making sure she's happy, to like making sure that my family members are feeling happy. And if what makes them happy is, I don't know, like giving them a 1-hour foot massage or doing the dishes so that they don't have to, whatever it is, those are all like these little things that, as dumb as it sounds, are kind of Dostoevsky's version of upholding love in society.
No, and I think that's...
And that can be extended to, like helping your neighbor cut the grass or whatever, right? It can keep going up the chain, but wherever at whatever point you can no longer keep going because you don't have time for it, or you need to handle your own personal issues, as long as within your mind you're doing that in the parameter of it being for the sake of others. Yeah. And not necessarily because, I'll do the dishes today so that they can do it tomorrow. Yeah. And then I'll have free time tomorrow to, I don't know, go golfing or whatever. Yeah. Like,
who golfs?
Who knows? No, I don't know. I think it was just on my mind because like my coworkers were going out golfing or something.
My God. Well, what I was going to say was that I think that that's all very correct. And I think that...
I mean, this is an idea that has been expressed in, I think, various religions, particularly with respect to the concept of God. But I think we've talked about in the Wonder Woman episode, was it?
In the Wonder Woman episode, characterizing
we can characterize God as the form of love and connectivity that binds things together in a meta-narrative sense. Yes. And the reason that you dedicate yourself in the ways that you can to others, right, in a genuine sense, you're doing it for the sake of God or for the sake of some sort of deeper love.
Upholding love in society. Right, exactly. Yeah.
Is that the idea that's expressed in various religions is that when you seek to find yourself, you don't find anything. But when you seek God, that's when you find yourself.
Yeah, because, you are a connected part of that whole.
Exactly. And I think that's what I'm saying.
You're not this isolated entity that is now looking for something else. It's all an embedded dialectic.
Yeah, and it's through the struggle, it's through seeing how you are able to impact others, seeing through their eyes what you've done for them, all those kinds of things in however way you can do it. I mean,
it's really important to note that not everyone has the same level of capacity, and that's totally okay.
Yeah.
Whether it be from a physical perspective, your physical circumstances are limited, or your psychological, emotional circumstances are limited, you don't have the bandwidth, you don't have certain skills, or you don't have certain predispositions. I think that's part and parcel with the idea of the spark, where everyone is unique and everyone has limitations and boundaries that they need to learn and uphold. As Peter struggles with being able to learn and uphold his boundaries and his limitations, that's okay. You do the best you can.
Yeah, and I mean, none of us have superpowers.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's the point, is that you don't need to have the superpowers.
That's why it's a universal principle. It's literally entirely dependent on what you can do, being able to do the best you can do for your unique circumstances and your potential.
Yeah. Peter being Spider-Man was an inherent property of him as a person.
Yeah.
Right. It could have been anyone, and it was you still have that choice to make.
And Miles reiterates that at the end. He says anyone could be Spider-Man.
And
if
the point
you
of that
didn't know that, now you do.
Exactly. Golf clap. I'm trying to think of a J. Jonah Jameson quote.
I do.
You're fired.
You're fired. I do love the fact that MCU J. Jonah Jameson is basically Alex Jones.
Oh, so classic.
That is probably one of the funniest things they could have done. Thank you everyone for listening. Hopefully the chill, slightly chaotic nature of this episode was okay. Next week's episode is going to be a big one. I hope that...
We keep hyping it up.
We keep hyping it up. It's basically just going to be like an hour and a half of us talking about why we loved Falcon and the Winter Soldier so much, even though we went into it determined to dislike it. Par for course. Thank you for listening.
Yes,
as always, if you have any questions, thoughts, comments, contributions, criticisms for how we're doing this, I know that our setup is a little bit non-fancy, and so sometimes the audio is janky. As I learn more about Audacity, that will slowly reduce. We would love to hear from you, and we love doing this. So hope to see you next time.
Because of how janky this episode is, this ending is equally janky. We're just kind of sitting here like...
Be seeing you, my friend.
Be seeing you.